We're going to get started. So this presentation is Webforms for Government. My name is jrockowitz. I'm known as jrockowitz on the web. I'm a Drupal developer and software architect. I built and maintain the Webform module for Drupal 8. We're going to start off with some Webform basics, but before I even do that, as we're going through this presentation, there's a lot of features and functionality in the Webform module. I'm going to go over a couple of things, and if I miss something, keep it in the back of your mind and feel free to ask a question and I can demo it. Or I can go back and show a little more information about it. But for now, I just want to give you kind of the lay of the land and start off with saying, the Webform module is a powerful and flexible open source form builder and submission manager for Drupal 8. It provides all the features expected from an enterprise proprietary form builder combined with the flexibility and openness of Drupal. And the flexibility and openness of Drupal is what I really value about the community and the Webform module, where you get a lot of functionality and add-ons. And the use case is that you build a form, or you'd copy a template, publish that form on your site as a page note or block, collect submissions, have people fill out the form, and then they hit submit and you send out some confirmation and notification emails. You review those results online, and then you distribute those results by either downloading a CSV or remote posting it to a third-party server like a CRM. And I break it down to these three steps. You're building a form, you're collecting data, and then you're distributing the data. And the demo I like to do is very simple. It's a clean install, and you get a contact form as the default form that you can work with. I just want to add a company field to this form, just get a little extra information. So I'm going to go over to the form builder, and I'm going to add a text field. I'm going to call it company. I'm not going to go through all these options. I'm actually going to collapse them so we can go through it a little quicker. Because you just need to set a title, and that'll generate a name. I'm going to hit save, and I'll just show you it adds it to the bottom of the form. And it should say your company, it should be at the top of the form, and I kind of want to show you another way to do that, and this is more for developers, is yes, in the UI I want to emphasize you could hit required, save it, you can drag and drop it up, like that, but you can also get to the source code behind the form, and in this mode you can see the form as YAML. I'm going to grab this company element, put it below your name, sorry, and let me make this bigger, and change the label, your company, copy a property. And I'm not going to, this is like the most technical we're going to get here. So I will just explain to people what's going on here is you're looking at the name of the element, the type of text field, the title, and then these are properties. They define how the element should work, and hence pound required, true, makes it a required element. And hit save. Go over to the test tab. And you can see how the element's been moved up, and it's called your company. And what the test tab does is it just populates any web form with just some default Latin values. You actually have control over the values that you need to populate it with. I personally, never change this because random.com is perfectly okay with me. And now, so we've built a form, we're testing the form, I'm going to hit submit. And that's it. Data, now, this is a contact form, it sent out 2 emails, a confirmation notification. So we've generated submission. I'm going to go back to the UI. And now if you go over to the results tab, we can see this single result down here that I just submitted. You can view it over here. And just to show you what I'm talking about in the emails is there's also a resend tab, which is just giving you a preview of the 2 emails that went out. The confirmation and the notification, which you can see below. These are just to ignore them. Well, that's the text, by the way. Please ignore this email is the default test value that was set. So that if someone got it, they'd know to ignore it. So now we've looked at the results, we've reviewed them, now we want to take them out of the Webform module, and downloading is the most common functionality. And I also want to realize that some people are still on Drupal 7, this is the Drupal 8 version of the module, which mirrors a lot of functionality, but the user experience in the UI is different. But this is a feature in D7, and you can go and download it. For a demo, I'm going to do it as an HTML table, and there's this option to open the HTML table in Excel where you would get a nicely styled table, but for these purposes, I'll just show it to you on screen. Instead of downloading, I'm going to just show it on screen. Just hit download and it'll generate the file. and here's your data. And you can actually go extend this exporter and customize the look and feel of this spreadsheet. Let me get back. Okay? Cool. So let's continue forward a little bit. So just understanding the Webform module, usually this comes at the end of this information, but I wanted to just tell you, the Webform module ships with reasonable defaults, but everything is customizable. So we created an element by just entering a title, but there are about 40 different options you can set and tweak the look and feel of that element and the behaviors. And you need to experiment with each element in the settings. Very important with elements, because there's about 80. You should disable elements you don't need. If no one should be uploading files, disable the file upload elements. And on top of that, for developers, it's important to emphasize that you can disable unneeded settings in form alter hooks. You can go in and tweak the UI of the Webform module and be like, I just don't need this feature set at all, and just take it out. And I like this little GIF because, so this is the kitchen sink of all the labels available to a form element. It starts off with, you can have a title, you can have a little tooltip, you can have placeholder text, you can have the standard description we're used to below the element, and then there's even this more slide up. Each one of these descriptions and approaches have different use cases, and you should use all of them at once. My general recommendation is to try to just use a simple description below a text field, and if you have a lot of information, the more slide out, and you can control the label of that. So for some project I worked on, we changed the label to an explanation, and it really loaded an entire page of information that someone needed to understand the input. And the question mark little tooltip I recommend using sparingly. I use it heavily in the Webform module because the use case is very specific. I don't have a lot of space. People are coming back to the form, so they don't really need this information except once. When they're like, what does this do? They roll over the tooltip and they get some help. Most forms are filled in by users one time. They come into a site. You don't want to make them do too much work to get the information they need. And this is just showing you in the configuration page all the elements. There's checkboxes to disable, and I'm scrolling down to show you the password element's disabled by default because the Webform module doesn't encrypt data. We don't want people to use the password unless they know exactly what they're doing. Either they need to encrypt the data or send this password somewhere else. And you can also see the file elements. You can turn those off. So the Webform module provides examples and demos that can be used as a starting point for building forms and applications. So that if you turn on the Webform example module, there's a style guide with every element type. There's examples of multi-step forms, how to use conditional logic, flexbox multi-column layouts, and then there's these demos of building an event registration system and an application evaluation system. I will explain event registration a little more as we go through, but these are just complex applications because they involve, a node, an event node, and a registration form. Or an application involves someone filling out an application, and then people coming in with another web form and evaluating it. And those demos help you get started with it and see how to set it up. And this is just the style guide. I'm just going through showing you the kitchen sink of everything. I cannot emphasize how important this single form has been for every project I've worked on that used forms, because what it does is it establishes kind of, for lack of a better word, a contract between how your forms are going to work and how your designers are going to design and customize them. And when something breaks on a form on your site, you can go back to the style guide, confirm it's broken here, and tell them, come here and fix it. Look at what's going on. And you can go and cut just a web form, so you can go customize this and take out features you don't need. You can build examples of features that you really are important. If you're doing special things with entity references, you might want to include that here. And there's just a lot of different ways to learn more about the Webform module. And instead of putting it at the end, I want to emphasize it so when you get confused, or when you might feel overwhelmed, as I want to address, is there's lots of documentation, there's cookbook with recipes, there's screencasts, about 40 different ones of different features and approaches. And Drupal Answers has a good community where people are responding to your questions if you need help. And if you find a bug, file it in the Webform issue queue and it will get resolved. So let's get into some specifics about web forms for government. And I decided to approach the presentation with 3 big concerns. I think it's about collecting data, securing the data, and then accessibility is just what you got to do these days. And, collecting data, displaying it, distributing. Security is, I just boil it down to preventing malicious users from accessing data they shouldn't see. And accessibility is just equal access to people with disabilities. And we'll start with collecting web submission data. And what are, let's start off with what are the different types of inputs available to collect data. The breakdown, I try to break it down as simple as possible, even though there's a lot of elements available. You have text elements, text field, HTML editor, options, which is checkboxes, radios, selects, buttons. You can even do images. Then there's file uploads, which are broken down into individual kind of media types to help it. So if you have a dedicated image file upload, if someone's on mobile, they click, it automatically opens the camera on their device, which is really useful if you want to say to someone, take a picture of your signature or something. And then even with signatures, there's advanced widgets. So there is a signature element that you can use. And finally, there's entity references, and entity references allow you to kind of pull in other data on your site, nodes, terms, users. And this is just a screenshot of a few of the inputs, just to point them out. What's the breakdown? So you have your text input, your options input, which I'm just doing checkboxes. Buttons are the same thing as options, they just are much bigger. And you can have cute kittens, which are images, and truthfully, it's a Slack menu behind the scenes. And finally, there's the signature element at the bottom. Now, composite elements are multiple inputs working together. I think these are really important if you're doing a rich web form install where you might have multiple forms or you're collecting complex data sets. You can use them to collect addresses, names, profiles. You can create your own custom composites, which is just really useful. If you have a standard profile of how you define a user, and this is the naming convention, the fields, or the user experience you want to collect user information, you can build your own custom composite. And then they're reusable, so you can just keep creating it. And this is just an example of an address element. And it's, one, you say, I want to add an address to this form, and you get all these different inputs. And you can customize the labels of each one, but it just groups the data together. And with file uploads, people are familiar with file uploads, allow users to post files to the server, and then you can store them and send them off. There's also a new feature that was recently added to attach files to a web form submission. So the concept is that, let's say you had someone filling out a form and you needed to email them a contract or some agreement or disclaimer or a file. You can attach a file to a submission and that will go out to the email, or when they go view the submission they can look at the file. You can even take it a step further where you can dynamically generate a file associated with a submission. The example it was built for a government site. Government has some archaic systems. They needed an email to go out with an XML attachment with the submission data, because the system they had was looking at an email inbox, parsing attachments, and pulling in the data. So you can actually build an XML packet that's attached to emails that you send out. And it's a lot to figure out how to do, and there's a screencast about it, and I am just showing you the help section, which is the last tab when you install the Webform module. And you can watch a video on how to set up email attachments, and it walks through all the steps. So moving to displaying collected submission data, forms can have previews. I'm not even going to demo that functionality, but it's a pretty, important thing just to be aware of that if someone's going through a very complex form to let them review the data. I do like that now submissions can be converted to PDF using the entity print module, and I'll give a little demo of that in a second. And when you're starting to build custom views and data displays, there's a lot of support for tokens. So you can build exactly what the email is going out and embed tokens, and each token can control how things are formatted. And if tokens don't work for you in almost all use cases, including email or how a single element information is displayed, you can switch over to Twig and build out exactly what you need. And this is just a quick, downloading submission. This is just converting the submission that you're seeing online into a PDF document. And kind of a joke, I'm like, there's a video and a blog post about it that's walking through this functionality. So that PDF is completely customizable. And there's also this concept of computed elements, and I'm finding them more and more powerful when I'm building forms, is they perform calculations. You can have them perform calculations after someone submits a form, and then you can take that calculation and include it in email. It allows you to kind of display additional information. So one use case, actually in the screencast will show it, but you could ask someone, select a user, and then you can go pull that user's information, like their email address, their full name, and embed that into the submission or send it out in the email. you can use it also to generate really custom displays of information as someone's filling out a form. And it supports AJAX computations, and just a technical note about that. And I'll switch because this is a demo of an AJAX calculation. So the first one is just doing some math, adding two numbers, and it's just on the fly. This hits the server and does the calculation on the server. Huge benefit for government. Like, there's a performance issue when you do calculations and every calculation hits the server. At the same time, the benefit is that calculation is completely secure. It is happening on the server, and no one can see the back-end logic of the data going on. And the second one is just someone selecting a user, pulling all their metadata into the form, into the submission on the fly. So, how can you review submission data? You can review the results online. I kind of showed that in the little basic demo, but you can also customize those results. You can decide what columns should be visible. And you can, this is for people switching from D7 to D8. Views integration got moved into a dedicated module so that I could focus more on the features about building a form, and the Webform views integration module focuses on generating views related to it. And for customizing results, this is just showing you, this is actually the data that we just started to create in the demo. And you go to the Customize tab, pick the columns you want, drag and drop them. And what I'm doing is just disabling kind of the metadata around this web form that we don't really need to display, like the IP address of the user. And the message could be very long. And I hit save. You get a very clean, simple view. And you can do this for every one of your web form instances. And with the Webform views integration, what I'm showing you is actually the second to last tab. It's kind of a funny way to approach this, but it's the add-ons tab, which shows you all the different, it's keeping track of all the different modules in the community that you can use to extend the Webform module. And I'm just showing you the Webform views integration module, which is listed there. The analysis module to generate graphs and charts. Also, that feature got moved out of the Webform module, and you can find it in this view, and you can filter it. For anyone doing a lot of integrations, at this point I think people have done some integration for almost any external system we could think of, like MailChimp or Salesforce. And hopefully you can either use that module or at least be inspired to write some custom code for it. And this is also a new feature. It's, I showed you downloading a submission, but I think when you let someone pull data out, you should let them bring data in. So you can now upload submissions from a CSV. And you can even go into downloading, so I showed you how to generate one single PDF, but in that export tab, or download tab, to kind of use them interchangeably, you can download every single submission as a PDF. So if you need to archive a form, that's a great archive, because that's a record. You could do that, you generate a spreadsheet, and then you download every submission as a PDF, and you've got a really pristine archive of the information, and it will include the files. So the bulk uploading is a very quick screencast. I'm just showing you a spreadsheet here that's in Google Sheets, and I shared the data through a URL as a CSV. I'm going into the Webform module. Next to the download tab, it's a module you have to enable. I'm just cutting and pasting that remote URL in, and it's going to parse it, say that there's 4 records, confirm, do a mapping. The mapping's clean because the columns in my spreadsheet match the elements, and it just brings in the data. This is an incredibly powerful feature for admins. You can even use it if you've got like couple hundred or thousands of records and you need to make some bulk change to it. You can go in, export it as a CSV, go into Excel, manipulate the data. If you keep the UUID field intact, it will merge the data very cleanly without any problems. I'm going to go back to something I talked about earlier. I like doing demos. It kind of breaks up the presentation. I'm just going to show you how a composite element and a multi-step form. I haven't even talked about it, but I think it's nice just to demo the capability, because if you're building rich forms, you might want to break it up into steps. So for a composite element, what I want to do on this form is, instead of collecting the name, company, I want to use a contact element. So I'm going to delete these. Delete. I'm going to go over here, add elements. And these are broken into groups, so if I collapse all, you can see composite elements. I usually use the filter at the top, but I figured I'd just show you all the composites. There's an address, basic, by the way, basic address and advanced address is just that it's a very simple address element with text fields. If you install the address module, you will get that address widget that's very rich in collecting international locations. But let's go to contact. And I'm going to call this contact. And you'll see every element you can customize and say whether it's required. And you see name, company. I'm going to do something just for this demo is I've got to turn off email because we already have an email address wired to send out the confirmation notification email, so I don't really want to create that duplicate information. I'm going to go down, hit save. I'm going to bring it up to the top. Okay, you can view it. Now this form's getting a little long, so what I want to just show you is the multi-step, which is adding 2 pages. So let's call it your information. That's 1 page, add page, your message, save. Now we just have to move things into the right place. And we can even, I'm not going to turn on a preview, but you can. And if I hit the test tab, it'll fill it out. And you can just click through the steps. 1, 2. Okay, so let's keep going. So securing web forms. I think this is a really important thing to consider. Consider when you're deploying a web form module. There's multiple levels of security you want to think about. And the first one is who should have access to complete and manage web forms. And there's a lot of different variations of controls. We start off with permissions, which everyone should be familiar with in the Drupal community. Permissions really do control kind of global access to all web forms and submissions. That's where you define this user can access administer all web forms, or administer all submissions, or access all their own submissions. And then web forms allow specific access to the web form. So you can take that global permissions and apply them only to a form. So you can say these users, these roles are administrators to this web form. Or, only authenticated users can fill out this web form. And you can also take it to the next level, which is element level access, the best example for element level access is you have administrative elements on a web form. So when an admin goes in or a reviewer goes into a submission, they'll have some extra fields they can customize and tweak. You can even put some workflow in those and say only the administrator or reviewer can access this, approve or deny field. And then there's this web form access module, and this is a very nuanced module. Okay, it's taking a step back. You have a single web form, and now you can apply it to multiple nodes on the site. That's where the event registration system kind of kicks in. You can take a registration web form and have event nodes. You create 10 event nodes, and you can have the same web form attached to all those nodes. And then you're collecting individual registrations for each event. The demo actually shows you when you do that, you go to each event and someone's registered, you're only seeing registrations for that event. The web form access module adds a layer of access controls on top of that approach, where then you can control who can access which nodes. So you can have, the demo that I have set up for that is a regional contact form where you have the East Coast and West Coast, and you can say these users are on the East Coast and therefore they can access the East Coast contact form and administer only that form. And once again, there's a video for that, and that's the next. I'll jump around for 2 seconds to say there's a video about it because it's a really complex logic. But if you need that level of functionality, it's worth exploring. On permissions, I'm calling out probably one of the most important permissions or concepts that you must pay attention to. So I demoed before that you can access the YAML source code behind a web form. This is calling out the permission that allows you to add custom CSS and JavaScript to a web form. Only administrators should have access to this. So you need to make sure you know who you're assigning these features to. In most cases, you can turn these off and have one user who can go add some CSS and JavaScript. That's just, by the way, just for people who don't understand, it's where you might need to make a minor visual tweak to a form or add additional custom behavior, but there's security implications to that. So yes, you want to pay attention to that permission. The YAML source is the other big one, and I'm blanking on, there's one other one that, by the way, they all have these warnings to tell you to pay attention to them. And this is just scrolling through the access rules just so you kind of see the level of control that you can get to a web form. So you're seeing it's also the pattern in Drupal, the CRUD pattern of view, update, delete, administer, any, own, and then there's also the ability even to say who can test a form, who can get to that test step. So let's talk about, securely storing data. I have these two options here, and I kind of, there's this option that's omitted that should be the first one is, you can secure Drupal to collect data. This is not an impossibility. This is, you can have a Drupal installation that's well managed, and you can collect the data and make sure it's secure, and that's a perfectly viable way to do it. The other option, which can sometimes just be a mandate or a requirement, is you need to encrypt the data that's going into the Webform module, the Webform submission tables. And there's the Webform encrypt module to do that. It provides really granular levels of encryption controls. It takes a little while to set up. I actually had some problems getting it set up, but people are using it, so I think you just need to do your homework on it. And the second option is really the one that I find more interesting, is you can disable the saving of results. You can check this box and say, no data should ever be stored in Drupal. Nothing. Everything is transient. With file uploads, a little caveat there is what happens with a file upload when you check this box is it's written to the temp table and stored for, I think, 5 hours depending on your configuration. So it's just written to this little temp table, and then it just gets deleted on cron. So what do? You disable the submissions. So this is the encrypt module. I mean, once you have it working, it's a checkbox. And this is the checkbox to disable submissions. And I have the little warning message here because it's kind of hinting where I'm going with this is, if you're not storing the data in Drupal, you got to do something with it. You either send it through email or you do a handler to take that data and put it somewhere else. You don't want to lose data. And so, Webform submissions which are not stored in Drupal can be sent via email or posted to a remote server. And we're now switching to how to handle submission data. And so there's this concept of Webform handlers. And we introduce email notifications and confirmations. I'm going to show you how to push data to a CRM. If you installed the MailChimp module, you could subscribe someone to a mailing list and take their email address and move it there. There's also some handlers that allow you to flag submissions based on submitted values, so you can, star it, you can lock it, and you can even go as far as conditionally changing the confirmation message someone sees based on their data. So the breakdown of the handlers that ship with the Webform module, there's an email handler. There's also a scheduled email handler. And going back to the event registration system, it's used because a day before the event, you want to kind of send out a reminder, and that's exactly what the scheduled email handler does. Remote post just takes that data and pushes it to any URL. And actions and settings is what you can kind of tweak how Webform is going to behave or how a submission is going to, like you can change values on a submission. And I want to point out when you're building Webforms, there's a debug handler. And I'm not even going to demo it, but all it does is shows you the data going to the server. If you're building custom handlers, it's really useful because you're like, okay, here's exactly what the data is. Now I kind of understand what's going on. So I'm going to demo disabling results and remote posting submissions. I'm going to stick to this form. One time. Okay. I think we're good. I'm going to go in. I'm going to purge the results. If you turn it on, it'll give you a little warning that you still have some results and you're not saving anymore, but let's just clear them. And now I'm going to go over to settings. It's right here. There's your little tooltip. And because I have emails set up for this, I'm not getting any big warning. There would be a big warning if you check this off and have no handler set up. It's going to say you're going to lose data. Now I'm going to go over to the handlers, and you're going to get kind of the back-end preview. There's the email confirmation notification. And the handler I want to demo is the remote post handler. So I'm going to hit it. And a little interesting note here, you see the scheduled email handler is disabled because to schedule an email, you have to have data in the database. You have to have that submission data to be like, okay, what's the date? When do I send it? So you can't do scheduled email handlers if you're not storing submission data. But let's go to the remote posts. And it just kind of gives you a little demo. Let's see. Let's move it to http://mycrm.com. You can also add custom data. You can even use tokens and build your own custom data set that you're sending out. By default, all your fields will be sent as is to the server that you've selected. And I'm going to switch over, so you can even conditionally trigger any handler, which just opens up a whole array of possibilities. If they check a certain box and say, subscribe me, you can then push them into Salesforce and subscribe them to a mailing list. I'm going to go over to the advanced tab. This is where you can get into some really interesting nuances where you can pass authentication parameters, send the packet as JSON or encoded data. It's very important, like I've avoided getting into authentication here, so you might, for developers, need to extend this and write your own authentication layer to it. What I really want to get, and you can even control just some error messages, but all right, this is an important one, debugging. Because by the way, I don't think mycrm.com exists, so we're going to get an error. Okay, I'm going to go over the test tab. I'm going to hit next, send. It's failing. By the way, okay, completed. Did it go through? Wow, mycrm.com exists. It's fine. Obviously, this is going to fail, but what this does show you is this is the data packet, and because we're using a composite element, you're going to get an associative array. You can flatten this using custom, build out custom data, but there's the data going through. Email, subject. And this is just giving you debug information. If you had a failure, it would give you the error response codes. Okay. Wrapping up. So let's talk about accessibility. Why do governments care about accessibility? There's a lot of sessions on accessibility at this conference, and it's a requirement. Section 508 means you've got to care. And there's some, cases in the courts right now that are indicating that websites must care. The Domino's one stands out the most to me, that if you can't order a Domino's pizza online, that is a major problem for people with disabilities. And they got sued for a lot of money. In the Drupal community, Dries did a blog post a while ago. That's the founder of Drupal, and I'm not going to read the whole quote, but I think he just basically put down the gauntlet and said, we need to care about accessibility. It benefits everyone. This is part of our community. We want everyone to benefit from it, and Drupal has guidelines and are active about it. And the Webform module also strives to be the most accessible form builder on the market. I strongly believe in this. I think it helps improve the quality of the code, the user experience, and just makes us better, I hate to say people, but developers. So Webform, it follows Drupal's best practices. The generated forms are accessible. The drag and drop form builder is accessible, which is very rare in any of the form builders I have tested. They just don't care. They reach a point where they're like, it's too hard to get drag and drop to work. And I'll make a statement where Drupal is just amazing, because Drupal's drag and drop is fully accessible, and that's not me. That's core, people fixing it. And so the Webform module, one approach that I've started this year is doing some audits, some self-audits. And the self-audits linked to from the Webform module's main page. You click through, it's a spreadsheet where it's just tracking the issues, the guidelines, and seeing what problems we have to fix, what's been fixed. Trying to get, I think it's AA compliance. The form builder is fully keyboard accessible. There's a little shortcuts module. It's kind of experimental, but it just shows you there's some shortcuts. But more importantly, you can tab through everything. I kind of want to demo it, but I'm running out of a little time. But I'll leave it with, you can not use a mouse and tab through every single aspect of the web form builder and build a form without ever touching, a mouse, and everything has screen reader accessibility with proper labels. So kind of wrapping it up, because I think I really am close to time. Yeah, so just, get involved in the Drupal community. I just want to call out, join the DA. Drupal Planet is a great place for information. A lot of my blog posts go through Drupal Planet. There's the newsletter, which is kind of more information. We're doing some Webform accessibility sprints at GovCon. It's downstairs. Webform is very stable, but since it relies on core, there's lots of little core issues floating out there. So we're trying to fix these these accessibility issues in core. And I just want to help people get started. It's an overwhelming experience contributing to core. Sometimes you can find smaller issues, and there are ways to get involved. And I don't expect everyone to write code. And with the Webform module, I just want to promote the Webform module's Open Collective. You know, it's just Open Collective is a service that the Drupal community is starting to use to help fund projects. It collects funds transparently and distributes them so you can see exactly what's going on. It is, I'll throw out there, I need help figuring this one out. It's a big ask for a government agency to add that to their billing, budgeting practices to go to this service. But maybe over time people get more and more comfortable with it. But what it does is it provides money to do things. You know, in the Webform module, this is just, you know, get involved. I want to point out what I'm doing with it. The logo you saw in the beginning and at the end, that was paid for by these funds. I'm trying to, you know, as the security issues come up, give people thanks to encourage, kind of like bounties, but I don't want to call them bounties, but a $50 thank you kind of says something to people that they spent some time helping make the Webform module more secure, possibly using it to offset travel costs, professional accessibility reviews, and maybe even funneling money through priority support there, because that might be easier for some organizations to do than, you know, getting a contract with an individual developer for a government is a lot harder than maybe going through an open collective as a third party. And I'm going to say thanks and take some questions. Thank you. Start here and go up to the top.
How would you contrast Webforms to, say, Gravity Forms in WordPress?
It's better. No. You know, here's the thing with WordPress, and if people are trying to compare form builders in the WordPress community, so WordPress doesn't have a form API. Every single form builder in WordPress has their own API that they start off with, and almost all of them are using PHP template to build these forms, and that means your form has PHP code mixed in. They have security issues, and Gravity Form has had some problems. In terms of features and functionality, this is pretty close. I have a strong feeling that Gravity Form has great support. Like, I haven't used it, but I'm going to throw out this is one of those decisions with WordPress versus Drupal. You're paying for support, and Gravity Form has a huge community, and I think they really do support their, you know, as much as they can because they're being paid to do it. If I was going to throw out my favorites of form builders outside, because hey, I'll give you 3 that are great. In the WordPress community, I think Ninja Form is a better user experience. It's cleaner. That's, you know, Gravity Form is the more popular one. Outside, Jotform is like the big gorilla in the room of form builders. That one that's been around for a very long time. But there's one called Form.io, which I have to give a shout out to. And their kind of model is that you build a form and you could bed it into any type of application and then collect the data. So it's very close to what you're seeing here, but it's an isolated service. And that can work really well if you have multiple systems. You need to have the same form, like a WordPress site, a Drupal site, custom application, and have forms in it. The downside of that approach is you don't get the relationship that you get with Webform module and Drupal. Like entity references just don't work. You know, in the Webform module, we're really tightly coupled. You can build some really rich applications that way. Hope that. Other questions?
How do you deal with the spam emails? Do you use Honeypot or?
Well, that's where the demos come in much better. It just saves me a lot of time. So I think when I started doing the add-ons, that kind of came up, and I was like, how do I start tracking this? So if we do spam, let's see. Yeah, there's a series of spam protection. I think if I take this off, we'll get all of them. And I'll walk through all of them just so people feel more comfortable with it. Collapse all, spam protection. Yeah, there's a few. I always recommend Honeypot. Honeypot is a no-brainer. It just works in the background, and it just limits how many times someone can submit a form in a duration. Captcha's also really good. Those are the 2 I personally use. Antibot, I've heard people had success. I don't use CleanTalk and Human Presence Form Protection. They're very similar to Molem. I think that service makes a lot of sense. So it's a third-party service that's tracking your forms and seeing what type of spam's going in. So it's doing some like AI thought analysis of this data and then blocking submissions. Any other questions? Sure.
How well does it work with different payment gateways to accept payments?
There's a bunch of, well, I mean, I personally, I would never take payment on my websites anymore. I would redirect or do the iframe technique. There are a few add-ons. Let me see. Yeah, that's why this is a good page, because let me see if I can just do a payment search, what people are supporting. Well, there's the donate module.
There's a Stripe.
Stripe, yeah, that was the one that came to mind.
What's it called?
Stripe. My current system with payment for one client is we redirect to a third-party service. So they fill out the data, and it's not, to be honest, it's not the cleanest integration because we're passing like URL parameters and people can muck with it. But I don't think that's a hard ask. You just have to have your third party do a little back-end checking, and that to me is the most secure way to do it. Oh, and Commerce has some integration. That's very important. I want to emphasize that. There are people kind of using web forms within Commerce a little bit, and that could also be another approach. I'll take yours.
Is there a way to preview and print?
Well, print PDF or just print is in the print button? Well, I've spent some time so that when you're previewing anything in the Webform module and you hit print, it looks okay. Like the browser render, and by the way, with printing, it's a lot dependent on your style sheet, your print style sheet. There's nothing stopping it from being a cleanly printed form. I mean, the most concrete example would be in the back-end 7 theme, when you're looking at all those results, if you click print, it actually looks pretty good. I'm fixing some 7 theme issues, minor 7 theme issues. With the PDF generation, while you're in mid-process, I'm unsure if it would work, because think about the data is being posted to the server, and somehow to get that PDF generated, you have to post back that data and have it render. And I don't think I've fixed that.
So, there's a tangential question. I'm trying to make my website user-friendly for a logged-in user to create a node in a friendly way. I have found that Webforms, I can design, I could have design all the fields in a much more user-friendly way than create a new node for an event content item and get that as robust as Webforms. Could you use Webform as a generation for that?
Yes. I'm going to apologize. One thing, I forgot to repeat all the questions so they get recorded, but this is a question that comes up. It's, can you use Webform to create nodes on the site, creating content? I personally want to invest a lot of time and figure it out, but it's a major task. Someone has stepped up and created a module to do that. Without showing the module yet, just to point out, so there's this concept of handlers. These are plugins that you can create that they capture every single action that's happening in a web form process. I'm talking, this handler knows when it's being rendered, altered, the form, alter, render, submit, validate. But then when a submission's created, it goes into all those entity hooks. Submission created, submission processed, submission deleted. In there, there's code snippets floating around where you can actually create nodes. You can just map it to users, any entity type, where you're just taking that data, which is very flat and simple data, and saying put it into these fields. I have not spent time testing it, but I think it's called let me see if I do a search for content. The content creator module. And I'm recommending it because I think this is a scenario that you're talking about. Now let's make it a lot bigger for the video. Provides the ability to create nodes after submitting web forms to mappings between fields and created nodes. I think it's really close. I think, the example would be, I don't see, a signature might be difficult to move over to a node. But if you're just trying to get a nice clean user experience with multiple columns, yeah. We have time for a few more questions because, yep.
So generally when you create a web form, you basically have it configurations, push the code out to production.
Yep.
And it's there. But you can also make changes to the web form production, right?
Yeah.
Which makes it out of sync.
Okay.
So how do you manage that? Recommend that?
Yeah. I'm going to plug my. Okay. So the question was web forms are. There's some more detailed presentations, but just to clarify, web forms are config entities. They are stored in code that is exportable from one site to another. Submissions, just to go through the whole thing, submissions are content entities stored in the database. The issue with config entities is they can be overwritten. And if I go to my blog, I did a blog post, and it's basically, even in the community, this is a problem even with blocks, because blocks can get overwritten and some people will edit them on a live site. There's a stack of modules you can install and configure. me 1 second.
Ignore.
Yeah, it's a combination. So this blog post is just like, I use a combination of config ignore and config split. Config split's nice because you can ignore your web forms, but still have them written out into a directory, so you have some version of them. So it gives you some revisioning of what's on production. And yeah, those are the two that work really well. I've had no problems with that. The only challenge is I personally think it's all or none. Either don't ever don't import web forms ever as config and just, write custom hooks for the individual web forms that you need to make changes for. If you try to do one, like exclude certain ones, it can get really complex. Any other questions?
Hi, Jake. In the previous version of Webform, we were using a save as draft module, but we actually used a tokenizer approach, so without having accounts, people could save a larger web form, come back and resume just by sending an email with the token. Is there a scenario that would permit you to do that in Webforms as well?
Yeah, you can save anonymous drafts. So anonymous users are tracked in the sense that they can save drafts, and if they do a submission, it actually still stores it's a cookie, a little session cookie, and if they log in, it will take that data and switch it over to their authenticated account. So that pretty much addresses it. And in D7, there's a patch trying to get that into the D7 version. More questions? Okay. Give to you. I think it's fine. Go.
Do you have so you talked about handlers earlier. When I started working with the Drupal 8 Webform module, I actually wasn't aware that they were really a big thing. But I'm not asking you to go into detail now, but do you have any other presentations or resources where you go more into a deep dive on everything you could do with handlers?
Yeah. At DrupalCon Seattle, I did an advanced webform presentation, and that presentation was not recorded. But the videos around, like the video, I recorded parts of that presentation and they're in the screencast. So I think there's an advanced web form presentation that I did that goes into creating your own elements, handlers, and exporters. And that'll get sharp. And there's an example in the web form module. That is the way to go. There's a web form example handler. You copy that and start manipulating it. One more final question. I'll go all the way to the back. I'll answer any question in the back because I wasn't seeing that part. So you're going to have to be very loud.
Do you have additional filters within forms? And is there a way to query creative forms in views?
Querying, wait, you're saying in views can you do query of forms, not submissions, correct?
So let's say I've created 5 forms, there are different categories. I want group 3 of them on one page, I want to group 2 of them on another page.
No, the short answer is no, because they're config entities and views doesn't work with config entities. There are some patches and modules out there to try to get config entities exposed to views. There is a caveat there, and this is kind of the approach when you're starting to build these complex applications is, if you take the web form and attach it to a node, that web form node is exposed to views, and then you can start applying a lot of logic on it. I see people using that even to get the group module working. That's the best answer I can give you on that one. It is very easy to query. I just want to throw out there, like, I use views a lot, but you can do entity queries on config entities, and it's really powerful. And you can do a lot of filtering and custom code around that. Any more questions from the back since I ignored them? Sorry. Well, thank you. I'll be downstairs. If you need help with anything or have questions, come down to the sprint room after lunch, and I'll be down there for 2 hours, and I can help you with your projects, or you can help the community with web forms. Thanks again.